Today the Shenango River is a picturesque scene of gently flowing water. A little more than 10 years ago, it became a nightmare that still haunts many families. In June of 2006, following a period of relative drought in the Susquehanna River basin, a cold front came to a screeching halt above northern Pennsylvania and New York's southern tier. Over the next week, the area would receive 6 to 8 inches of rain, enough to change the lives of hundreds living along the banks of the Susquehanna and Shenango rivers forever. June 28th saw the rivers rise to shatter previous flood records in small towns such as Conklin and Owego. According to CNN, over 15,000 people were evacuated from their homes. The National Guard was flown into Binghamton by order of New York State Governor Pataki to rescue dozens marooned by fast-rising floodwaters.
So I really wasn't focused on all the rain we were getting. I was more focused on getting the details together for the trip. My kids were 9 and 13 at the time, and my mother and father-in-law arrived on the 27th to come and spend some time with us before our trip, and also to take our dog home with them, that they were going to watch her while we were gone. And we all went to bed that night, not thinking too much of the weather. We had never experienced a flood before, so we really just went to bed. About 1 o'clock in the morning, we had started hearing pounding at the door and flashing lights in the neighborhood, and the local firemen were letting everyone know that we needed to get out of the neighborhood. So to get into our neighborhood, you had to go over a bridge where Page Brook is, and then at the back of our neighborhood was the Shenango River. So they were afraid that if the bridge went out and the river got too high, that we would be trapped within our neighborhood. So we had about 40 families, I would say, in our neighborhood that all had to leave in the middle of the night. And in the meantime, we got everything together, and where were we going to go? We decided that we were going to go to my brother's house, who was also going on the Alaska trip with us, but lived in Johnson City, up on much higher elevation. So we weren't worried about him being flooded. We were just worried about the fact that it was like 2:30 in the morning, and we couldn't reach him by phone because he was asleep and didn't hear his phone. So we showed up at his house, and after banging on his door quite a bit, we were able to get inside, and nobody could sleep. We had to figure out what to do, and watch some TV, and kind of fun. We thought it was funny at the time, but we watched Singing in the Rain on TV, and I think we'll never forget that.
Luckily for Stacy and her family, their neighborhood received only minor flooding in the June floods. Others were not so well off. The town of Conklin was the hardest hit, with hundreds of homes severely damaged or destroyed. FEMA received over 15 million applications for assistance as a result of this one rainstorm, and many families chose to leave the area, never to return. In addition to the physical devastation, 2 truck drivers were killed when a sinkhole collapsed a section of Interstate 88 near Unadilla. Just 5 months later, in November of 2006, heavy rain and poor cleanup from the June floods caused widespread flash flooding of creeks and a landslide near the Port Crane exit on Interstate 88. Conklin was hit hard again, along with the small town of Shenango Forks. One resident recalls how his house was affected when a culvert wasn't properly cleared after the June floods.
In 2006, I lived at the address where I do now, which is out in Shenango Forks, and I lived near a creek, not where one of the rivers, so for the floods in June, I actually ended up helping out a lot of people who suffer from river flooding, and cut open walls and stuff like that, and got kind of used to that idea. I was actually flooded in November of the same year, so if I hadn't had any experience dealing with it before, I probably would have just crawled up into a fetal position and died. But instead, I tore my own house apart instead, and I'm still there. We had a drainage problem from a creek that kept clogging up a culvert, and they've since replaced that culvert with a bridge. So everything that used to come down and clog it up washes through now. And I wish I could say the house is completely remodeled, but it's not. The first floor has come a long way, and had to tear out all the carpets, throw it away, tear open the walls at 2 feet, take out all the insulation, because otherwise it's all gonna grow mold. And once we had all that stuff cleared out, then we could start kind of putting it back together, and that was the slow part of the process. And received some money from the government, thankfully, for disaster relief. We were one of the small pockets of disaster from the flash flooding. Flash flooding, which was a phrase that I couldn't hear for a while without breaking into a cold sweat. Because every time they said flash floods, they meant me. And it was a while before that got fixed, and hard to sleep at night every time it rained, and all that fun stuff that went along with that. So now, on the way back, still walls, paint, and things like that, but the house is livable, it's warm, and it could be a lot worse.
Drew was just one of many to be affected by this round of flooding. The neighborhood near Shenango Valley State Park, where Stacy's family and many others were evacuated in June, saw a bridge collapse over Page Brook in the November floods, due to a buildup of tree branches and other refuse, which was never removed. The flooding was so severe that it permanently changed the course of Page Brook. 10 years later, cleanup is still an active process. Reinforcement walls have been built and refuse has been cleared, but many houses still lie abandoned, their residents permanently displaced, due to damages considered beyond repair and insufficient funds to rebuild. In September of 2011, the southern tier was again affected by record-breaking floods. In the end, the lesson is that we must expect the unexpected from nature. Better preparation for and cleanup after disasters may make a world of difference towards the prevention of future flood damages in the southern tier.